Good afternoon and welcome to today's Curator at Home talk on the Morrises and the De Morgans. My name is Sarah Hardy and I'm the curator of the De Morgan collection. And today, like I said, I'll be discussing the friendship between two probably the most preeminent families of the arts and crafts movement, and within those two families, just some of the most amazing people. And so I'll be introducing those to you today. As you see them on your screen from left to right, we've got William De Morgan. Just next to him, his friend and collaborator William Morris. Then William's wife, William De Morgan's wife, of course, Evelyn De Morgan. And then on to Jane Morris, William Morris's wife. Just next to her, we've got Jenny Morris, the oldest daughter of William and Jane Morris. And then to the next one along is May Morris, the younger daughter of William and Jane Morris. And then right on the end there, on the right-hand side, is Mary De Morgan, who was William De Morgan's younger sister, who also comes into this story. It's a story of sort of families and collaborations that span generations, really, and all the way through the families, as we have seen. So the obvious place to start is to tell you a little bit about the friendship between William De Morgan and William Morris. Now, these two young men, I think, were full of ambition and fueled with a great passion to bring art and craft to the masses and to be able to allow people to incorporate art into their everyday life. Morris, of course, once said, "Do not have anything in your home that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." And that really was at the heart of the arts and crafts movement. It sought to fill people's lives and homes with the joy that art can bring. The two artists, the two Williams, met in 1863 at Morris's premises on Red Lion Square, where he'd set up the firm. Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Co., later Morris and Co. And Morgan was taken there by an artist called Henry Holliday, who he'd met at the Royal Academy after his 4 initial years of study there. And Holliday saw something in the two Williams that he thought it was necessary to introduce them. So off they went to Red Lion Square, where Morris took it upon himself to dress up in these great vestments, this medieval clothing, and play on one of these bizarre-looking instruments, a regal, to De Morgan, insisting upon him and impressing upon him the importance of stained glass design. Now, whilst that might be quite an odd first encounter for some people, De Morgan was just absolutely hooked, and the two men shared this incredibly humorous sort of joie de vivre and outlook on life. And I think it was in that moment of madness that the two really knew that they would become lifelong friends. It all started artistically, really, with De Morgan working sort of alongside the firm and alongside William Morris on designs for furniture and for stained glass, before finally working on ceramics with him, before De Morgan set upon his own in 1872. So the designs that you're looking at here are panels designed by De Morgan for a Philip Webb cabinet, which is now in the William Morris Gallery in Walthamstow's collection. And you can see that even though De Morgan doubted himself greatly, and actually after he'd met Morris, he dropped out of the Royal Academy and decided to pursue this craft career instead of an artistic career. But actually his designs were pretty good, and he had quite a good conception of the human form, on the human body, to make these gorgeous mythological subjects for this cabinet. The cabinet once belonged to Horatio Lucas, an artist friend of both of the artists, and like I say, it's now in the collection of the William Morris Gallery in Walthamstow. The two soon started working on ceramics. William Morris had a real knack for persuading friends to be involved in crafts that he couldn't quite master himself, and persuading them to take on those crafts and become masters of them. And I think there's a certain element of that in what he did with De Morgan, sort of persuade him that ceramics might be the way to go. De Morgan certainly excelled at stained glass and was widely credited with being a wonderful stained glass designer, both by Morris and by his daughter May, as we'll see. be. But this is a really early design that the two artists collaborated on, called Artichoke. You can see there it's got this sort of medieval simplicity in the way that the artichoke has been stylised and formalised to fill this square tile. And Morris certainly was looking for someone to take over ceramics at the firm, and this example was installed at Kelmscott Manor around one of the fireplaces there. So it was clearly one that Morris came to love of De Morgan's designs incredibly well. The two artists soon became known for their tile designs, and Mendland Hall in Dorset was filled with these beautiful decorative panels by Morris and De Morgan, probably the best and most beautiful early tile collaborations between the two artists. These panels, there were 6 panels in total that were made. This one's now in the collection of the V&A. They are also in the collection of the William Morris Gallery as well. Julep and Trellis is another one that both artists supposedly collaborated on the design of. De Morgan made them. Morris & Co. made them themselves as well back in the early years, in the early 1870s, and they were sold through both companies. So again, just this example of, it went beyond friendship. It was about sharing artistic ideas and sharing the output as well, the creations. When De Morgan first set up his pottery in 1872, it was in his family home on Cheney Row in Chelsea, just close to Thomas Carlyle's house, which is still there and will be open again for visitors once the coronavirus pandemic is over. And Morris tried to get De Morgan to persuade Carlyle to join SPAB, the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, which he'd just set up. And I don't think De Morgan was quite as driven politically to make a difference back in those days as Morris was, and he had a word with Carlyle and it failed to get him on board. But I think it shows this sort of overbearing power that Morris had on De Morgan, particularly when De Morgan was starting out in his pottery. One of De Morgan's studio assistants, Mr. Bale, once commented that Morris would come stomping in to the house on Cheney Row and come booming up the stairs yelling "Bill" at the top of his voice. Well, poor old De Morgan had the nickname Mouse because he was so meek and quiet and mild, and I think he just sort of let Morris sort of go around the studio and take the best looking pots that he wanted and sort of use his designs as well, and that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of the friendship and where the sort of power balance I suppose might have been between these two artists. But here's a lovely photo of Cheney Row, and we can imagine the two chaps up and down there as they share their great artistic ideas. In 1882, De Morgan moved his premises from Cheney Row in Chelsea out to Merton Abbey near Wimbledon, where Morris already had premises. And you can see in the black and white photograph there some of Morris's workers working on wallpaper and on text block printing. De Morgan, I think, was inspired to move out to the countryside to escape the dreariness of being in central London and have this freedom and this artistic creativity. And it also afforded him space. So he had the space to have people working for him to a specification to make the ceramic objects, as well as creating the surface pattern for them, which he hadn't done before. As you saw with the tiles, he would buy in blank tiles and design the decoration for them. But here out at Merton, he had the space to allow his staff this wider creativity to make the three-dimensional objects. And this move to Merton comes just 2 years after something rather charming, which was that once Morris had taken out a lease on Kelmscott Manor in Gloucestershire and also had Kelmscott House in Hammersmith, he decided that he would hire out a boat, which this motley crew of artists and designers of the day called the Ark, and they sailed from Kelmscott Manor through to Kelmscott House. And in the De Morgan Foundation archive, we have a wonderful transcript of a story that De Morgan put together about his time spent on this boat with some of their other pals. And it is so charming. There's an element of it where, as well as the Ark, the main boat they're sailing on, they also have a rowing boat, which they pick up in Oxford. And apparently, De Morgan's written that Morris said that he didn't quite trust one of them. He thought he had a bad case of chronic alcoholism because his eyes were so gogglesome. And the whole script reads like this. It's full of jokes and funny puns and references to different artists that the two knew. And it really just cements the idea that these two were incredibly good friends, and sort of what better way to to go on in business together than moving their premises close together and living and working in this real creative harmony. Of course, through the chaps, their wives were able to meet. Now, William Morris and Jane Burden married in 1859. Evelyn De Morgan wasn't born until 1855, so you see there is a little bit of a generational gap there. The De Morgans were then married in 1887, so quite a long time after the Morrises did, like I said, in 1859. But the wives of the two Williams met, and we know that they knew very much of each other, particularly as Jane Morris was becoming, or had become by the time the De Morgans married, this real muse of the Pre-Raphaelite movement. And that was clearly a movement that De Morgan sort of grew up in her artistic creativity around, and definitely created pictures in that style. But one of her most interesting pictures, I certainly think, is this one from 1904 to 5 called The Hourglass. The painting's on the right hand side of the screen. On the left is a stunning chalk pastel drawing that was created by Evelyn De Morgan, probably in 1904, of Jane Morris at Kelmscott. This is after William Morris's death, after she's sort of retired from modelling and being an artist's muse, and this scandalous affair with Rossetti is all behind her, and you can see her there looking incredibly wistful with her grey hair, and then she's presented with that same sort of wisp of grey hair in the painting as she holds onto an hourglass and watches the time drift away, even though she's still sort of bedecked in this wonderful lavish medieval costume that's completely typical of Pre-Raphaelite painting. Over her shoulder, of course, you've got this angel piping to her, and of course the message there is that time is going to take age in death. We've got the Grim Reaper over Jane Morris's right shoulder on the top left of the painting as we look at it, and I think really what the two women were saying is that actually that Pre-Raphaelitism and that sort of this sexualization of women by the Brotherhood, that was a different generation. It was in the last century, and as we look forward to a brighter feminist future, we have to remember that time has destroyed the beauty of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and that, I think, was something that the two women quite possibly came up with together. For Jane Morris to come out of retirement at this time and sit for Evelyn De Morgan, a wonderful and commercially successful artist of her own time, I think there's a lot more in it than it being incidental and coincidental. I'm sure both women agreed to this and came together for this exact purpose, which is put forward in the painting. This is a sketch of Kelmscott Manor. So the home that Morris took out a lease on with Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and which Jane Morris ended up living in after William's death. It also became the home and retreat for their daughter Jenny, who you can see here in a sketch again by the artist Evelyn De Morgan. And Jenny Morris took to living at Kelmscott, I think again as a retreat. She suffered with epilepsy, and it was, I think, considered much better for her to be kept away from society and to sort of have this place of convalescence and rest out in the countryside. And I think for Evelyn to be allowed into that family and that home, and sort of allowed into this very sort of close and protective space in order to sketch Jenny Morris, Jenny, to sketch her, sort of really shows the length, extent and strength of that friendship. May Morris certainly was a very good friend of the De Morgans, and actually much closer in age to Evelyn De Morgan than her parents were. So whilst William, I think, was very good friends with Jane and William Morris, really it's Evelyn that is friends with May Morris. There was only a 4-year age difference between them. So even though I think it's often considered that Evelyn was just as good sort of pals and friends with the Morrises as her husband William was, it's actually the daughters that are closer in age to Evelyn, and I think she would have been better friends with. So here we have a picture of May Morris just beside a watercolour that she completed. She was a brilliant artist and embroiderer and businesswoman in her own right. And this watercolour is a painting of the Grange, which was the Burne-Jones's house. So Edward and Georgiana, Burne-Jones and their family, their daughter Margaret, their son Philip. And in this very sensitive watercolour study of their interior, you can see on the fireplace there are two proudly stood De Morgan lustre vases. So I just love this idea that May had been brought up and had grown up in this real artistic community alongside all of these artists and knew them so well, that, you know, that really their artwork and their friendship was just all around her growing up. And I think this drawing is a really lovely way to illustrate that. When the De Morgans passed away, May Morris was called upon by Evelyn De Morgan to write the obituaries, not probably of herself, but certainly of her husband, William. William had closed, William De Morgan this is, had closed the ceramics business in 1907, completely shut down, and he'd begun writing. He became a best-selling novelist, and therefore he was very famous, sort of on a Dickens level, as being a famous author at the time of his passing. This meant that the obituaries of him focused very much on him as being an author and a celebrated writer and a brilliant storyteller, but most of them failed to mention this huge career in the arts, and particularly in ceramics and the pottery, that had gone before. And Evelyn De Morgan appears to be fairly outraged at that. It caused her to donate a great number of ceramics and about 1,200 of his drawings to the V&A Museum, so that his career as an artist would be remembered on this national level. So it's a very generous gift of her. And she also called upon May Morris to write an obituary for William in the Burlington magazine for connoisseurs, so the art publication of the day, one which still exists today. And across her two-part obituary of William, May really focuses on how adored William was and how she looked up to him, I think. And she really does celebrate his artwork. And one piece that she describes in particularly wonderful detail is now in the De Morgan Foundation's collection, and it's this vase here. And she really commends William De Morgan on using the fish pattern under what is the secondary pattern of the net that they're all caught in. And it's a vase which really shows off again his humour and his creativity, and that was definitely noticed by May Morris in her obituary as she put this together. 2 years later, very sadly, she wrote the obituary for her friend Evelyn De Morgan, which was also published in the Burlington magazine. And whilst it's a lot shorter, it really is one that's filled with friendship. She talks about long walks that the two had when they visited Italy together, of Evelyn De Morgan's real desire and focus on her painting and how she would work for hours and hours a day. And she also talks of the time that they spent in Chelsea together. And it's a very touching piece that you can tell has been written by a very close friend. And I think that's something that's often lost, again, like I said, with this the idea of the generations and how they should stack up. But really, it was Evelyn De Morgan that was very good friends with William Morris's daughter, May. The final person to mention in this brilliant illustration of this close friendship between the two artistic families is to mention Mary De Morgan. She was William De Morgan's younger sister, and she was as much a friend to the family as William had been. She'd lived at home with her mother in Cheney Row and knew William Morris very well from that period of the De Morgan's life. And so when Morris was on his deathbed in Kelmscott House in 1896, Mary De Morgan, for the last 4 months of his life, installed herself there as his chief nurse and carer alongside Jane Morris and May Morris. So she was really a well-loved character in the family, and commended very highly in lots of accounts from contemporaries who lived close to Hammersmith or would visit Kelmscott House about what a wonderful job she was doing of caring for Morris. And she was one of just 4 people there when he passed away in 1896. As soon as he'd done so, with her sort of great resolve that by all accounts she had, and sort of a fierce determination to get things done, she enlisted the help of Emery Walker, a printmaker and typeface maker who lived just around the corner, and they travelled some 70 miles straight to Kelmscott Manor in Gloucestershire to tell Jenny Morris, the Morris's eldest daughter, of William's passing. So someone who fiercely cared about the family and about what was the right thing to do and the correct thing to do at these very difficult and trying times. And the image there that I've got on the bottom left is one of her novels. She was a famous teller of these brilliant, sort of quite dark story stories in her time, and On a Pincushion is just one of them there. And the beautiful illustrations that you can see on the cover of that book were designed by William De Morgan for his sister and for her novels. So I think that brings us to the end of this sort of wonderful connection between all these brilliant individuals in these two families, and shows off a little bit that I think De Morgan and Morris is very well known connection, but actually it went much further than that through the families. Thank you very much for listening. I can't see that anybody's got any questions, just some more hellos. So hello to Mary listening in Italy, and hello to Dot in Wolverhampton. I'm so pleased that everyone could log on today and join us for this talk. As ever, we're asking for donations for the De Morgan Foundation. We're a tiny independent charity that receives no central funding. So this period of museum closures, when we rely so heavily on ticket sales for events and admission for museums as one of our main sources of income, it's quite a trying time for us at the moment. So if you're enjoying either this talk or any of the other talks we're doing, then we ask that you might consider donating to us. We usually ask for £5 for a curator talk, but any money that you can send is greatly appreciated. And there is a link on the Facebook Live video that you're watching, and I'll repost that at the end of the video as well. Thank you so much for watching. I will be online again in the coming weeks, so do keep an eye on our website to see what the different talks are that are coming up. And thank you again for watching. Thank you. Goodbye.